Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the folks over at the 538 blog, they've come out and said that, hey, there might be a chance for Democrats come November. Now, the narrative is, bloodbath. The narrative is, it's the midterms, sitting president, his party always takes a beating. But this is the first time that it shows Democrats with a chance to hold on to the Senate. I actually think there's a chance that they could increase their 50-50 margin. I'm hoping here where I'm at in Pennsylvania, you see, John Fetterman come out ahead of Dr. Quack, which again, someone who has no business whatsoever running for Senate, let alone Senate here in my state of Pennsylvania. But look, if Herschel Walker is still within striking distance in Georgia, anything is possible. And here to share some thoughts on, this November and maybe how Democrats don't get slaughtered, I've asked Reed Galen to come talk with us. Reed is the co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Reed, thanks for taking time for us.
No, thanks for having me back, Rick.
So I'm looking at this and I'm going, this is a good sign. 538 is now, saying, hey, there's a chance. 51% doesn't make me all warm and fuzzy, but it's still better than it was.
Well, look, all you got to win by is, 50% plus one. So let's take what we can get. I think it is good news. I think it's moving in the right direction. As I think, the fallout from the Dobbs decision on abortion is starting to take hold. I think that the January 6th committee hearings have had a depressive effect on, I think, especially older Republicans when it comes to, Rick, they're old enough to remember, a party I knew. You may not have been a fan of Ronald Reagan or George H.W. Bush, but they were. And they don't see this as that party anymore. Gas prices are starting to come down, as we saw. It looks like Senator Manchin from down in West Virginia is actually going to sign on to a deal. And so I think that there is good momentum. I think also one thing you noted about President Biden is President Biden has, low approval ratings. I don't think we should deny that, but it does not seem to be translating, at least in this moment, into electoral hardship for Democratic candidates. And I think that's an important thing.
Yeah. Now here's the thing. I remember Reagan. I grew up during the Reagan era. No, I wasn't a fan of his policies, but I didn't have the kind of disdain that we see for politicians today. I respected him. I respected H.W. Bush. Didn't vote for him, but I had respect for them. And we're talking about a different era that I'm pining to go back to, where we're fighting over issues, we're fighting over policy, and not over dehumanizing someone you disagree with.
Yeah, well, that started, in the mid 1990s under Newt Gingrich, right, where he understood fundamentally how to nationalize an election and how to make every federal election about issues that typically Republicans want to talk about and Democrats have not always been the best at countering. And I think you're right about this, Rick. When it comes to culture wars, Republicans like to start them and Democrats like to lose them. I think that's a little bit different this time. I think that on the abortion issue, because it is so, there's a broad feeling amongst likely voters, right, that this is a net negative for women in America. And then I think we start to see some of the fallout from these things. The little girl over, next door in Ohio, or, stories of women going into the hospital with ectopic pregnancies where they've hemorrhaged. These are having real world effects. And so I think in some ways the Republicans caught the car, they're the dog that caught the car.
Yeah. Now you said that Republicans like to fight over issues that Democrats like to lose. I look at Adam Kinzinger's tweet today, going after Vice President Harris for her, saying that going through her pronouns and saying that she's wearing a blue dress and that she's a woman, to a room full of blind people, and him saying this is why the left can't win elections, and everybody immediately jumped on him. Without understanding what he was saying. You don't put yourself in this position to give the right the kind of fodder to go after you with. He wasn't saying don't be good to these communities, but don't say this kind of stuff to give ammunition to the other side, is what I think he was trying to say.
Oh, I think that's probably right. I think both the White House's release of that, I think, was inartful because they didn't provide any context. When I saw it too, I thought it, Rick, I don't know, because again, I didn't understand why she was describing the clothes she was wearing. Because why would you do that unless, again, you were at a table full of blind people, in which case it makes perfect sense. I think that Kinzinger is right, even if it's not a popular opinion, that wokeism, or whatever you're going to call it, is not broadly a popular sort of mindset for Americans. I don't think most folks, Rick, with some notable exceptions, and in your literal neighborhood, wake up hoping to be their worst self every day. And I don't think people like having it necessarily put in their face every day. That does not necessarily mean we don't have significant issues across both, racial and economic boundaries that we must confront head on. But that, as you know, it's very hard to convince somebody to at least accept your opinion as valid if the first thing and only thing you ever do is tell them what a bad person they are to start with.
Yeah, I mean, we're in very interesting times now. I'm sure you saw the president's speech yesterday, where he laid out his vision for the next. Well, after a long litany of whining and complaining about past grievances, laid out his vision for what is he hopes the next president's able to do. Kind of a law and order speech, which seems to me, as I took from it, usurping those states' rights that Republicans used to love so much, and giving, ultimate federal powers, going to federalize the National Guard, going to crack down on drug dealers, going to start executing people. Curious your thoughts. Does that speech give you a warm, fuzzy feeling?
No, it gives me a cold chill down my spine. I mean, it's not that different from the convention speech he gave in 2016. It's not that different from the inaugural speech he gave at the beginning of 2017. And now he's just reiterating his, and I think Stephen Miller, the ghoul that works for him, wrote that speech, this, American dystopian hellscape that, his folks desperately want to believe in. And, it is a law and order speech. But when, we can all agree, I think, Rick, that homelessness, especially in dense urban areas, is endemic and a significant issue with which we should deal. And we're not taking it seriously. I don't think anybody's taking it seriously, particularly. But the idea of setting up camps, outside of major cities brings back an awful lot of bad memories, and I think is the kind of thing that where Trump is now just veering into the weird and bizarre. He's always been strange. He's always been crazy. But now the things he's asking for, or talking about, are getting more and more extreme. But that may be true of the people who support him as well.
No, it's crazy. But I think what you just said is across the board reality. We're not dealing with any of our real problems. We're still throwing pies at each other while we haven't raised the minimum wage in 13 years. We haven't done anything really, substantial on healthcare or education, and we still got a debt crisis. There's so many problems that just seem to keep piling up, and we're still just eating each other.
Well, I think we're eating each other. That's true, but I think also when it comes to eating, the best way to eat an elephant, metaphorically anyway, is one bite at a time. Which is, yes, we have a lot of systemic issues because of the polarization, but also because, we are in many ways, Rick, a country in denial. We don't want to have to deal with these problems. We don't want to have to deal with this idea. I mean, to your point about the minimum wage, if Democrats in Congress said they wanted to raise the minimum wage from $7.25 to some, I don't know what the definition is literally of living wage right now, Rick, but the business community would go bananas. And, then the libertarians would come in and say, oh, you have to work your way up. I mean, that's all well and good, in an Ayn Rand novel. That doesn't really work for somebody who's working at Starbucks for, $11.50 an hour. Now, wages, I think, have increased, which is good. But I think that's as much due to a shortage of workers as opposed to workers being able to live on, something that they can take home, try and put something away, try and buy a home, try and even build some level of stability financially, which I think is so far out of reach for far too many Americans. Excuse me.
Yeah, well, the numbers they go into, had the minimum wage kept up with inflation from the late 1960s till today, it'd be about $14 an hour. Had it kept up with productivity, it'd be close to $26 an hour. Those are the numbers, and yet it's still $7.25, and I have no idea how anyone lives on that. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show.
Well, I mean, look, and Rick, I hate to interrupt, but just we are the most westernized post-industrial economy in the world, right? The largest economy the world has ever seen. And the idea that, people are supposed to live on the cost of a large latte, right, every hour just seems, again, disparate from reality, to say the least.
No, absolutely, and it's one of those things that's it's angering and frustrating and all of that combined. But we've had three presidents that have been able to raise the minimum wage. Reagan didn't want to do it. Obama couldn't do it, and Trump, there was no way he was going to do it. And now we're in another term of Biden. I don't think it's going to happen in his term either. This is not good stuff. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're with Reed Galen, co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Make sure you check out the work that they do at lincolnproject.com. I want to get your thoughts on this third party that is evidently forming. I don't know if you've seen this yet.
Sure.
Andrew Yang and Christy Todd Whitman are coming together with the Forward Party. I'm curious, given this idea that Democrats might have a shot of holding on to the Senate, that do you think this hurts or helps the effort in 24 for Democrats or Republicans? How do you see this breaking out?
Well, in full disclosure, I used to be chief strategist for one of the three groups that came together today to do this, and I spent 2 years and about $2 million trying to found a party. We got exactly one ballot line in one state, Rick. That was New York. And it will disappear this November because the Democrats decided they didn't want any more competition. This is a very hard thing to do in the United States. We are not a parliamentary system, right? Where in a state legislature or in Congress, if it was the Republicans, the Democrats, the Greens, the Libertarians, and now the Forwards, everybody would get a percentage of votes, right? They'd get to send that percentage of the body to Washington, D.C. or state capitol. Also, the two parties, both Republican and Democrat, make it incredibly difficult for new entrants, right? They put up ballot access laws, that's what it's called, to avoid having more competition. Do I think the political system needs more competition? I think it does. But then I think the last part too is all 50 states have their own rules about how you can qualify a new party. And some of them, like Utah, where I live, you basically fill out some paperwork, name some officers, and open a bank account, and voila, you're done. In California, it's a $12 or $13 million proposition. In a place like Iowa, you can only do it, during presidential election cycles. So it's a very Byzantine and complicated process. But I think the broader issue for all of this, Rick, is that each of these parties, and I was guilty of it too, they want to take a little bit of the left and a little bit of the right, and they want to make everybody feel better. And they say, we're going to compromise, we're going to come together, we're going to work together. And it's this triangulation. The problem is and I say this with all due respect to the people that are doing it, because I know many of them, is that it's not backed in belief, right? If you think back to the last major party we had come out in this country, it was in 1854. It was called the Republican Party.
Right.
They had one goal, to get rid of slavery, to abolish slavery. It was a hateful institution. It was an amoral institution, and it was one that must be destroyed within the boundaries of the United States. Now, it became other things as it went, right? But it had a founding belief system. And I think what you see now is that voters understand when they're being pandered to, and this feels a lot like pandering. I think the other problem, too, is that Andrew Yang, failed Democratic presidential candidate, Christy Todd Whitman, former governor of New Jersey, I have an immense amount of respect for. But, Governor Whitman hasn't been in office in like 22 years. Andrew Yang has never been elected to anything, was an interesting blip, I thought, in the Democratic primary of 2020. But who else are they going to bring to this? Because the two-party system is entrenched. Now, listen, I travel the country, Rick. Nobody likes either party. Don't get me wrong. I'm just not sure that this is the answer, and I'm not sure when it comes to 2024, what the impact is, especially, and I say this, there was a story in this outlet Puck about the fact that another group, No Labels, is raising $50 million to run an independent presidential candidate in 2024. So if that's the case, then you could see, as wild and woolly a deal in 24 as we've seen since 92, and that, frankly, wasn't that exciting.
Yeah, if I was going to start a third party, it'd be a labor party, because to your point, a single issue, making people's lives better wages, hours, conditions. For me, that's the way forward. Before I let you go, I wanted to get some of your thoughts on some of the stories coming out around Donald Trump. Evidently, he's talking about suing CNN for defamation, and evidently the RNC is threatening that if he runs for president, they're not going to pay his legal bills anymore. Any thoughts on those?
He will never actually sue CNN because I think, was it the New York Times or the Washington Post, had 100,000 documented lies he had told, so he is by definition a liar, even in the most objective sense. And also, he doesn't want discovery, right? He doesn't want CNN crawling around in his business. So that's just something to try and throw some red meat. The RNC, I think, is sick of paying his bills, Rick. I think they're sick of paying his legal bills, and they know that they're going to mount as the January 6th stuff moves down the road, and they don't want to be on the hook for it if he's indicted while he's president, because that will be tens of millions of dollars. I don't think they want to be on the hook for it at all. But I think that's the one thing they have going for them. Now, let's be clear, Rick. If he runs for president and he tells them, like, you're going to pay my legal bills, they're going to pay his legal bills.
Why are they paying his legal bills is my question.
It was, as I understand it, it was a deal he made with them before he left office, was that I could be wrong about this, Rick. I think if they wanted to use his name for fundraising, they had to pay his legal bills.
Got it. That's right.
So,
that makes sense now. So maybe under the bus, and maybe this January 6th stuff will be it. Do you think Garland indicts at some point? Let me get that last question in.
I think he probably does. I think it'll be but I think his attorneys, right, his prosecutors are probably hard at work trying to figure out how to put the case together. And like any old good crime drama, right, they'll start with the little fish and they'll work to the bigger fish.
There you go. Reed, I appreciate the time. Always great talk with you. Always insightful. Good stuff.
Thanks, Rick.
Thanks so much, Reed Galen, co-founder of the Lincoln Project, lincolnproject.com, the website. I'd love to hear your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. Right back after this. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.